Nu är det dags för Ascelia Pharma och Julie Varas Brogren, CCO, som ska presentera. Kör hårt. Du kör på engelska då?
Yes, I will do it in English. I'm Julie Brogren. I'm the Deputy CEO at Ascelia Pharma. And it's good to be here. I'm going to make some forward-looking statements as part of the presentation. So in Ascelia Pharma, we identify, we develop, and we commercialize new drugs that can help people with rare cancer conditions. We have 2 drugs in late clinical development. The first one is Orviglance. It's a liver imaging drug, so a contrast agent you use when you do an MRI scan of the liver. And we are focusing on the patients who also have severely impaired kidney function. I'll come back to what that means. For this patient population, we have an orphan drug designation from the FDA, and we are addressing a market potential of $800 million annually. We have recruited all the patients for our phase 3 study, and we are waiting for the results. The other compound in our pipeline is ONCORAL. It's a daily tablet formulation of a well-known chemotherapy, irinotecan. We have a collaboration with a global pharma, Taiho Oncology, and we are ready to start our phase 2 study for ONCORAL. I will focus most of my presentation on Orviglance today. We are based in Malmö. As you can hear from my accent, I'm Danish, but most of the team is Swedish in Malmö. So to talk a little bit more about Orviglance. The summary, the highlight is we are addressing a well-defined unmet need for patients who need liver imaging and also have severely impaired kidney function. We have an attractive market potential, and we have solid data from 8 completed studies in phase 1 and phase 2. As I mentioned, we've recruited all the patients for our phase 3 study, and we're waiting for the results. The initial results in terms of adverse events is that these are in line with previous studies, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about what it means that we're waiting for the results. So the next part is a little bit, mostly for those of you who know us a little bit and have followed us also the last month, but I'd like to just give a bit of background for everyone first. So what is this unmet need? Cancer in the liver is common in cancer care. It's common both because some patients have primary liver cancer, but the development of liver metastases is quite common in many cancer types. Oftentimes it's the first site where a cancer will metastasize, and oftentimes it contributes or directly leads to the death of the patient. So it's very important to detect these liver metastases early on and to know exactly where they are and how big they are. And the gold standard for doing that is a liver MRI. When you do a liver MRI, you want to both find out where the metastasis or the liver lesion is, and you want to find out to determine how you can treat it, potentially with a surgery or with drug therapy. You also want to follow up after the therapy. Is the metastasis gone? Have they come back? Today, the standard of care is to use a contrast agent, so a diagnostic drug that enhances the image when you do an MRI. So these are all based on gadolinium, a toxic heavy metal. So we call them gadolinium-based contrast agents, GBCAs. About 15 years ago, the regulatory authorities implemented a black box warning, so from the FDA, a black box warning for these gadolinium compounds, specifically for patients who have severely impaired kidney function. It's because the gadolinium is excreted through the kidneys, and if you have impaired kidney function, you have difficulties excreting this toxic heavy metal. The most important risk of side effect is called nephrogenic systemic fibrosis, or NSF, and it is potentially fatal. It's rare, but potentially fatal. So we have an opportunity to help these patients also have an improved liver imaging, because the clinical care or recommendation is, if you are at risk, you should use an unenhanced MRI. And in clinical practice, sometimes physicians will choose a half-dose gadolinium because they want a better image. So Orviglance aims to help and these patients and become the imaging option for patients who also have impaired kidney function. It is based on manganese, and it is specific to a liver imaging. Because it's oral, it will not enhance an image in other parts of the body. So we have completed our phase 1 and phase 2 studies, and we're waiting for the results of our phase 3 study. So this is just to summarize the design of our phase 3 study. We have recruited 85 patients. They have known or suspected focal liver lesions and also severely impaired kidney function. And what we are looking for is two things. We're looking for what we call the border delineation, so how sharp is the border of the lesion. And the other element is lesion to liver contrast, so the difference in enhancement of the image between the background and where the liver lesion is, so the effect of the contrast agent. In imaging drugs, the way to determine is that you ask several readers to look at the images and score each of the lesions on a rating scale on these two parameters, delineation and lesion contrast. You typically use 3 independent readers looking at all the images for all the patients. 2 of these need to agree that an Orviglance enhanced image is better than an unenhanced image. And of course you need statistical significance. So when we received the initial data readout, you have a quality measurement. It's about a month ago, and you have a quality measurement that we used. The first thing you see is how reliable are the results. And we saw that 2 of these 3 readers had a high level of intra-reader variability. So that what intra-reader variability means that you take a number of the patients from a study, and this is a standard for imaging studies and part of the FDA guidance. You take a subset of the patients and you ask these independent readers to look at them twice. They don't know obviously when, and there's a time gap between. And then you compare the 2 ratings. And when the difference in what they rated one time to the other is too big, the results are not reliable. And unfortunately, this is what happened to us about a month ago. 2 of the readers had too high variability in the rating when they saw the images twice. That means we cannot use the results. So we have to do what is called a re-evaluation or a re-read to identify 3 new readers. So it is, of course, a disappointment and also a surprise to us. So this is really our focus right now. So to bring Orviglance forward, we are now completely focused on this re-evaluation. We don't see a need to enroll new patients. In that sense, the study is complete. We have all the images. But we have had to cut some significant costs in the last month. And we are sort of preparing in September to communicate a more specific timeline for how long it will take, and also the financial implications. So it's a setback in our timelines. And of course a disappointment that we've worked through this past month. But at the same time, when we look at all the data we have, the feedback from physicians, from key opinion leaders, from doctors who participated in our clinical study, we still have confidence in Orviglance, and we have confidence that we will reach positive results for Orviglance. So this is the entire focus at the moment. So to come back to this confidence and what it means in terms of the commercial potential, we address a market of $800 million annually. That's based on this well-defined patient population. with the need for liver imaging and who fall under this black box warning. It's based on an attractive pricing because this is a small and vulnerable patient population. And we have the opportunity to really capture the US market, which represents half of the global potential. So to dig a little bit more into the US market, if we look at the volume of procedures, we are addressing around 100,000 procedures annually in this patient population. We have tested an attractive pricing range with benchmarks to other innovative diagnostics, with pricing research with experts on both the price level but also the reimbursement and coding standards in the US. And it's a market where there's a continuing growing need for timely diagnosis and treatment of patients. So this means that we have an opportunity to have a very ambitious but also very focused and tailored launch for Orviglance. So when we look at the clinical practice for these patients, 90% of physicians are worried and concerned about the risks related to using gadolinium today. Those concerns include NSF. So in spite of these concerns and in spite of a black box warning that has been in place for around 15 years, physicians do choose to use contrast agents sometimes. Mostly they use unenhanced MRI, but sometimes they decide to use a partial dose or a full dose gadolinium because it is so important to have a better image. And 16% of physicians today have experienced a case of NSF or more. So the concern is also, you could say, highly important in clinical practice, not only from a black box warning perspective. But there are other concerns today that have grown. If you looked 10 years back, everyone said gadolinium is here to stay, there are no concerns. First came the black box warning a little earlier, and now other concerns are growing as well. One is that it's well known that gadolinium is retained in the brain and other body tissues for all patients. Both the FDA and key opinion leaders want to know more about this potential risk for all of us. We also know that because gadolinium is excreted in urine through the sewage system and it's hard to clean, you can find it in our water, which is then contaminated. We don't know the effect of this, but there's an increasing, you can say, investment in finding out what it means. So this means that we are on the forefront, but other actors in the industry are also looking to find alternatives with less gadolinium or no gadolinium. So some of the big gadolinium manufacturers are developing or have developed half-dose gadoliniums. So Gabe and Braco have launched one last year. Bayer is developing one, and GE are in an early stage development of a manganese agent, which is for the full body, so not the same as ours, which is liver specific. We are really excited that we will be the first in the market with a non-gadolinium contrast agent, and the timing is better and better for this. So I want to talk now a little bit about ONCORAL, our other asset in development. So ONCORAL is a well-known chemotherapy formulated as a tablet. That means you can take it every day. Today, the clinical practice is that you typically go to the hospital every 3 weeks and you have an IV infusion in very high dose with irinotecan. It is well known that it has the potential to generate some severe side effects, and that some of these can be limiting both for the efficacy and the safety of the patient. So ONCORAL is a tablet formulation of irinotecan, and what it means is that you can have a more stable dosing for the patient. That has the potential to both improve the efficacy and the safety. So if you just look at the safety and a little bit back to the concept, so as you can see here, the high exposure is quite common in the current standard of care. We know that it typically leads to gastrointestinal, hematological side effects. And of these side effects, around 30% are severe or potentially life-threatening. We have the opportunity to dose daily, which means the exposure will be more stable in the bloodstream of the patient. So that concept is called metronomic dosing. And there are studies, not with our compound, but other studies exploring how metronomic dosing can show improved tolerability, and it also enables you to adjust the dosing more frequently if needed for the patient. So in our phase 1 studies, we have seen that it was well tolerated and the side effects were not as severe as you typically see for irinotecan. And we also saw in terms of efficacy that these patients had stable disease signals, even those who had been on irinotecan IV. So to talk a little bit more about the potential in terms of efficacy, this is an example from bit more than 100 patients who had breast cancer. And in this study, it was explored with if you compare the irinotecan dosing every 3 weeks with an irinotecan dosing every week. So it's still an IV. And in clinical practice, it becomes complicated to do an IV every day, obviously. But this is to test the concept of metronomic dosing. And what they saw is that the overall survival improved significantly for these patients. So our ambition is to improve both the efficacy and the safety for patients with a daily dosing of a potent chemotherapy. We are starting in gastric cancer. It's because there's a high unmet need and because irinotecan is clinically demonstrated in gastric cancer, but not currently approved in gastric cancer. Typically, when you develop a new drug, you would start with patients who have a severe cancer, and typically the treatment for these patients is with multiple drugs. We have identified a drug that can potentially have synergistic effect with ONCORAL, and that's a drug called Lonsurf, which is also a tablet formulation. So you have an animal model here that shows the potential, the lower arm of when you combine Lonsurf and irinotecan, not the daily but the IV formulation, you potentially have a better outcome. This is demonstrated here from an animal model with the volume of the tumor growing much less than each of these alone. So we are ready with our phase 2 study. We have the protocol, the IND approved from the FDA. Currently, we have put it on hold because we want to have Orviglance back on track, but we are ready to push the button on ONCORAL as well. And we have established a clinical collaboration with the company that commercializes Lonsurf, which they will help us and have access to this drug and supply it to our study. So to summarize, ONCORAL, we want to start in gastric cancer. There's a high unmet need. It's an orphan disease, and it's an attractive market. But we have the potential to help patients with other solid tumor cancer types. And in many of these cancer types, irinotecan has been clinically demonstrated or recognized in guidelines. And today, irinotecan is approved only in colorectal and pancreatic cancer. So starting in ONCORAL, we'll be looking into other solid tumor types as this evolves. So I want to summarize, focusing on ONCORAL, Orviglance right now. Our confidence is unchanged. We believe in the market potential to help patients who need liver imaging and who have severe kidney impairment. We have recruited all the patients for our phase 3 study, and we will in September communicate a plan for when we expect to have the headline results from this read and what it means financially for Ascelia Pharma. in ONCORAL, we are ready with phase 2 to help patients with gastric cancer and other solid tumor types in the future. Ja, det var det.
Yeah, thank you for a nice presentation. I'm going to start with the Sparkle study.
Yes.
And which measures you believe could be taken in order to reduce the risk of interreader variability, as you saw now?
Yes.
What measures could be taken for this not to happen again, so to say?
Yes, I mean, first and foremost, of course, we have carefully designed the readout. And when we saw this happen, we started talking to colleagues in the industry in imaging drugs and found out it's not that uncommon that you have a very high variability intra or between readers or within the same reader. That is exactly why this quality measurement is in place for imaging studies. So when we talk to them and to experts and advisors, we've learned a bit more on how we can fine-tune some of the training, the selection, qualification of the readers, and also the monitoring of the reading. That includes some changes in how it's typically done, because before the COVID pandemic, typically these readers might have been brought into one site to read, so it was easier to monitor. And some companies, of course, during the pandemic, let these readers sit at home or in their office. So there were some different requirements and learnings during the pandemic in terms of monitoring. So there's a number of things, but I would say learnings related to training and monitoring are key elements. But most importantly, it was a surprise and it shouldn't have happened, but it did.
Yeah.
So now we'll do it again.
Would it be an idea to increase the amount of radiologists that evaluate the pictures, or would that not help?
3 readers is very common for MRI,
okay.
And it could be an option, but you can say 2 out of 3. It has to be much less than that, whether it's 3 or 5 or 10. 2 out of 3, 66% is not good enough. So it's an option, but not necessarily the only one.
Okay. But yeah. And you expect feedback from the FDA, right? If you can pursue with these images, the same that you used previously?
We need to validate the regulatory strategy for a reread. It's not uncommon. We talk to other companies and advisors in terms of how to validate the regulatory strategy. And that will be part of the plan.
Right.
Going forward.
But you don't know any date where you expect feedback from the FDA, or?
No, we haven't communicated anything in particular about the timelines for that.
Right, right. And if everything goes according to plan now, when would Orviglance reach the market? Do you have any estimate?
I mean, we can add to, for now, of course, our entire focus is on this, both I think on our end, and I'm sure also on the analyst end and on the investor end. But if you add up the standard timelines we said when we communicated this finding that we expected it would take 6 to 3 months to have the headline results. And after that, typically there's a period for the NDA filing. In the industry, that also takes time. You need the full study report and so forth, and then you have a year for the review.
Yeah.
So we haven't said it yet, but you know, whatever that leads to, adding up, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. And you might also get a priority review also, and that
could get a priority review.
Yeah.
That is an option. So there are some pieces of the puzzle there, but same time as other companies with the opportunity for a priority review. The one I mentioned, the half-dose gadolinium that was approved early last year, no, mid last year, the year before, 22 by the FDA, was approved in a priority review. And I think that's very interesting because these gadolinium compounds have been around for years. And when Gaber and Braco developed a half dose, the FDA decided to grant them a priority review. So it shows a bit about the unmet need, the interest in innovation, and also recognition that there hasn't been much innovation for years.
Mm. Yeah, I understand. And in your view, how open are radiologists to trying new things in these patients, so to say? A new contrast agent?
Yeah. When we ask, we're looking at different things. One of the things we've done is some market research. We have more than 250 physicians that answered a survey, and 84% of them said that they were likely or definitely will use Orviglance at launch. It's quite uncommon that years before launch, without any communication broadly, any medical education, that they recognize that an alternative to either the concerns with gadolinium or an unenhanced MRI is something that they would use. There's some work going there, because every new compound needs some work for the adoption, but I think there's definitely awareness that these patients are vulnerable. There's a lot of efforts into caring for them, calling the nephrologist, testing their kidney function. So it is a bit a burden for the healthcare system. And the black box warnings are well known among all radiologists. So you can say that the unmet need is recognized. I mean, in terms of radiologists, you could say, when we've talked to them, you're also asking how willing are they to change behavior. When we meet them a couple of years ago, not so much talk about AI, and now when we meet them, they're all, yes, we all have an AI committee, and so forth and so forth. Yeah. So I think there's a wish to have an alternative for these patients, and a willingness to change and adjust practice.
Yeah, and have you done any studies where you have compared how good Orviglance is compared to gadolinium contrast agents in general?
We have one study from our phase 2 program, which was actually conducted at Karolinska in Stockholm, where we had one of the gadolinium contrast agents in Europe. It is indicated for liver imaging, and we compared, and you could say overall it was 20 patients, so it's not big enough to in terms of, you could say, the efficacy and statistical significance, but for a claim or a label. But overall, it was on par, potentially better in terms of the similar endpoints. But again, I think what's really important is that we are not comparing head-to-head with gadolinium, and we are not asked to compare head-to-head to gadolinium, neither by the FDA or in essence by radiologists, because today what they use is typically unenhanced, maybe half a dose, and certainly a very, very high awareness of the need to take extra care of these patients, and that there is a potential risk. So
I understand it's not super relevant maybe at the moment with the label that you are searching.
Exactly. So there could be an opportunity in the future, of course. Yeah. If we look at what's happening in the industry and the trend towards less or no gadolinium, who knows in the future if there's an opportunity to have a broader label. But this is a very strong starting point, clear unmet need, very attractive commercial opportunity as well. So it's a good place to start the introduction of a new alternative for patients.
Mm-hmm. And if we look a bit at the commercial side, you're setting up your own sales force and the commercial infrastructure in the US. How many sales reps do you believe that you will have, and how many of the clinics would you reach with this sales force?
Yeah. So as I mentioned here on the slide, the US represents half of the global potential, and these patients are vulnerable. So what we see in this real-world data we have is that they are the bigger hospitals. So the 100,000 procedures, which on average is 2 per patient, so 50,000 patients in the US, they are typically found at the larger hospitals. So when we mapped out you could say the commercial footprint required, we estimate that a team of 40 FTEs in the US, where half or a bit more than half would be in the field, there would be some back office, actually is what we need for an ambitious but also very focused and tailored launch. So it's not, so you can say, the kind of launch where it's about the army of sales reps you have. It's really about your dialogue with key opinion leaders and with payers and with the big hospitals that will drive the uptake. So around 40 FTEs footprint. Of course, we will outsource and work with partners. When you set up operations today, nobody would build every single function and IT system themselves, or nobody. Mostly it's not done. We, of course, will be smart about where is it valuable for us to build the capability, where is it valuable to work with others.
Yeah, but what you're saying is the marginal benefit of having more than 40 sales reps is not super good.
Not at launch.
To start with, at least.
Not at launch,
No.
because you want the first initial uptake at the larger hospitals. And the effort is mostly in the beginning. So once you have you're sort of on the right curve at the bigger hospitals, that team will have time to go to the smaller ones. Yeah, initially the best business cases in starting with that team.
Yeah. One question on ONCORAL, your other asset. How do you protect it? Do you have formulation patents? I mean, it's a well-known substance, so I guess you can't have any substance patent on it.
No, but we have formulation patents.
Yeah.
Correct.
And also orphan drug?
We don't have orphan drug designation, no. But gastric cancer is an orphan disease. So there's a potential for an orphan drug designation.
Yeah. Okay, time is running out soon, but last question. If you were an investor, what would you find particularly interesting in the case of Ascelia? Why should the investors look at this?
Yeah. So I think what is really interesting about these two assets is that there's a clear value proposition. And when you look at the compounds, both the manganese contrast agent and a tablet formulation of irinotecan, we have taken on development programs where there's a clear pathway. There's a clear pathway for the regulatory approval. There's a clear pathway for what kind of data we need. So we're not starting in the laboratory testing out phase 1 and phase 2. We are at a stage where we really see a clear path, which you could say from a broad industry perspective would reduce the risk of failure, because we are sort of a bit on the later stage with clear data, solid data on phase 1 and phase 2 for Orviglance. And then there is a clear unmet need. We talk to physicians and they recognize the need for an alternative for patients who need liver imaging and have poor kidney function. So I think those are the main parts. And then we are an ambitious team working hard in Malmö, and we need to get through this next you can say jump in our timeline and then move forward from there.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you for participating.
Thank you for having me.